You know, we often learn a lot about the politician side of you, but we kind of just want to learn a little bit more about the person.
What's the old saying? I can't tell you what time it is in less than 15 minutes.
That's right.
First of all, how are you liking Nashville?
I love Nashville. It's a beautiful city. I don't get here often enough, but really admire all the tradition here, country music tradition, but also the incredible growth that's happened because of great leadership, including some very good friends of mine that have helped lead this state.
Obviously, we're in Music City. What's your favorite song?
Well, right now, my favorite song is Country Again.
Okay.
By Thomas Rhett. We were driving home from Washington, D.C. when we moved back to Indiana. The first time I heard that song, and it's really been the anthem of our last year and a half back home again in Indiana.
In your book, So Help Me God, you've talked a lot about your wife, obviously, and how pivotal your family is. But how exactly did you meet Karen?
I was attending a church, coincidentally near the governor's residence, where we would serve 20 years later. And I saw this beautiful brunette playing guitar up in the group up near the altar, and I followed her out the back of the church and told her I was interested in playing in the guitar group, but she didn't really buy it. So I introduced myself, and after a little bit of sleuthing, I was able to find out her sister's phone number. I called her sister to find out if she was seeing anybody, and Karen was actually there babysitting at the time, answered the phone, and I ended up going ice skating with her and her niece and nephew later in the week. 9 months later, we were engaged. 9 months after that, we were married, and that's been 37 years.
I read the engagement story. I heard a little bit about it. Can you share just a tidbit about how you actually proposed?
Well, we always like to go down to the canal in Indianapolis and feed the ducks. And we'd bring a little bottle of wine, we'd bring a little bit of French bread with us. I hollowed out one of the loaves of bread and put a ring box in the front of it with an engagement ring, and then I hollowed out the other with a little bit of champagne, hid some glasses in a bag, and she cracked open the end of the French bread, out popped the ring box. I dropped down on one knee in front of that bench, surrounded by ducks, and she said to me, 1 minute, which made me nervous.
That's scary, yeah.
And then she started digging in her purse, and she'd actually had made a little cross with a heart on it that said yes. So she kept the ring, and the ducks kept the bread.
Do you have any advice for young guys or girls who are just trying to date and find someone to marry?
Every young man ought to face repeated rejection in his life, in person. You need to walk up to a girl and tell her you'd like to take her out on a date. And I did that a fair amount with a lot of rejection in my life, had a little bit of success. And so my advice to at least young men out there is don't ever hesitate to walk up to somebody that's captured your attention and tell them who you are, and be ready for it wherever the good Lord leads.
Do you have any secrets to staying awake in the long house sessions?
Well, I'm somebody that finds C-SPAN very exciting, and but no, there's no solution to that at all. They make a lot of coffee in the cloakroom just off the floor, and you just have to hang in. I served 12 years in the Congress of the United States, but it seemed longer, and part of it was those long debates. Oftentimes it'd go late into the night, but it was a great privilege for me to represent my hometown in Washington, D.C.
So who is a Democrat that you have worked with that is someone you admire, respect, although you may not agree with?
The late John Lewis was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s right-hand men. John was a liberal Democrat. I was a conservative Republican. We didn't agree on anything except the fact that he was a great man. He was sincere about his faith, and we forged a friendship over that. In fact, John invited me and my family to join him to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 2010 on the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. He's gone on home to be with the Lord, but the privilege of knowing him and calling him a friend is something I'll always cherish.
Switching gears a little bit, you travel all over the country. What would you say is the best fast food chain in America?
I'm very biased towards Chick-fil-A, and of course, number one would be, the standard is, but I grew up on McDonald's in Indiana, so I would say it's a pretty close jump ball between a Big Mac and a number one.
Okay, very fair. Pineapple on pizza or no?
I'm against it completely.
Thank you.
I think pizza should be a lot of red sauce and a lot of meat. You can throw some vegetables in, and that's okay. You can leave the meat off, and that's okay. But fruit on pizza, I'm just not for it.
Do you have any hobbies that we might not know about?
Karen and I have had a lifelong love of horseback riding. We had a couple of horses when I was growing up, and I'm told that when we stayed at Camp David, we were the first visitors there in more than 30 years to ask for horses to be brought up to Camp David. But I like what President Reagan said, that the outside of a horse is good for the inside of a man, and there's just something about being around horses that it's always been a great source of comfort and strength to me and my family.
When you're serving as vice president, do you still find time to be able to pursue your hobbies?
Well, serving as Vice President of the United States with President Donald Trump was, I always would tell people, I just ski behind that speedboat. It seemed like we never stopped.
Yeah.
And I'm incredibly proud of what we accomplished for the American people, but it was up early, out late. It was virtually a 7-day-a-week endeavor, but what we were able to do with our military, to revive our economy, to secure our border, to see more than 300 conservatives appointed to our courts. That record is something I'll always cherish, but didn't leave a lot of free time, but we still tried to make time for each other and make time for our family.
Who is the wisest politician you've ever worked with?
Well, I don't know if the late Chuck Colson would have wanted me to call him a politician, but he was in his day. He's someone that served alongside President Nixon. He would actually go to prison for his crimes during the Watergate controversy. But while in prison, he came to a faith in Christ and went on to launch the most significant prison ministry in the world. And I had the privilege of coming to know Chuck Colson when I was in the Congress. He was not only a friend, but became a mentor. And I thought his wisdom, his grounding in faith, his patriotism as a former Marine, his commitment to the conservative agenda inspire me to this day.
Now, I'm a little biased. Obviously, I'm named after Ronald Reagan, but I know that you got the pleasure to meet him, and obviously you were a big proponent of the Reagan Revolution and what was going on at that time. What was the most impactful thing that you ever saw Reagan do or say? Well,
I became a Republican because of Ronald Reagan. I was the Youth Democrat Party coordinator in my hometown in 1975. But when I heard the voice and the idealism of Ronald Reagan, I joined the Republican Party and joined the Reagan Revolution and never looked back. In 8 short years, Ronald Reagan revived the economy, rebuilt the military, stood for traditional values, and set into motion policies that didn't just change the country, but they changed the world. But I met President Reagan, as I write about in my book, in 1988. I was a candidate for Congress. I sat with him for a few minutes, and he said, "How's the campaign going?" And I said, "Well, it's going fine, Mr. President, but I have something I'd like to say to you." I said, "I just want to thank you for everything you've done to convince my generation of Americans to believe in this country again." And I'll never forget, in that moment, it was almost like the 40th President of the United States had never heard that before, and he kind of shook his head and said, "Well, Mike, that's a very nice thing of you to say." And I was really struck by his humility. He didn't think he'd done anything for the country. He just thought the American people decided to right the ship, and they put him on the bridge when they decided to do it. And I'll always cherish the opportunity to have met him and spoken those words to him.
What is the best part about being vice president from a job perspective?
I think the best part about being vice president might be the traffic.
Yeah.
They close roads when you're driving around,
Of
so
course.
not having to deal with traffic. And I love Nashville, but Nashville's a busy place to get around.
Yeah.
So, no, all kidding aside, I think the best part about being vice president was the ability to travel around the country, and whether it be to be at a place where there was a great accomplishment to be remembered, or whether it was in the wake of a hurricane or a flood or a natural disaster, to be there to make sure people knew they were heard. It was easily the best part of the job.
What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
When I was in college, I'd lost interest in faith. Didn't think I needed religion in my life. But I started to talk to some guys in my new fraternity who talked about having a personal relationship with God. I had decided to go ahead and be a Christian. And a friend of mine who's now a pastor in Indianapolis was wearing a cross that I thought looked good. And I asked him where he got it, and I kept bothering him for the catalog where I could order one just like it. And I remember the day he turned and looked at me and he said, "You know, Mike, you got to wear it in your heart before you wear it around your neck." Kind of pulled off a mask I was wearing. I made a decision to put my faith in Jesus Christ. When I made that decision, one journey ended and a new journey began, and it changed my life forever.